optimize your app's monetization strategy. So please welcome Karina. She will be having a 30-minute talk. So after which you will be able to ask some questions if you have one. Yeah, welcome. You can start.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you and nice to see you here. Thank you for introduction. I'm coming from Dublin, just landed a couple of years ago, so very excited to be in Bratislava and deliver some content regarding the Firebase. And as you can see from the topic, we mostly will be speaking about the app monetization opportunities. So I'm quite curious, how many of you guys already been using Firebase for your apps and for games? Raise your hands. Okay, so I see some number of people already adopting Firebase, which is very amazing. So hopefully after the session, you will discover for yourself nice ideas that you can think about for your next steps with Firebase and how you connect all the available resources that Google provides to scale your app monetization efforts. So some of the topics will include monetization, A/B testing, and user segmentation. And before we jump into the agenda, I brought some very cool swag from Dublin office, from a quarters. So please pay attention for this little Firebase pizza man there on the slides. And you'll have a chance to get some nice swag from us. So at the end of the slides, I will ask how many times you saw this little man, and the winner will get some nice stuff. So some of the agenda for our short session, we'll run through the Firebase feature, what it can provide. For those who are not familiar with Firebase, my goal here is to present how Firebase can help for your app to scale your monetization efforts. So we'll look at the key metrics we can see from Firebase, also the features, A/B testing, and some of the user cases, how we can use Firebase and which events we can log in and how we can easily detect our user behavior and basically predict how we can scale those users and boost our monetization. So before we jump into the different stages of Firebase and features it provides, before we also need to really keep in mind that behind every amazing app or game, there's the whole cycle that forms the success of the overall app. And when we speak about development, engagement, and running and maintaining our app, first of all, we need to make sure that our app is crash-free, obviously, to avoid the disruption of the user experience, especially if we have highly interactive app or game where we have tons of user interactions and steps that user completes throughout the app journey. It's very important to make sure that each step is properly logged in. Event is probably tracked, and then we can monitor and run, for example, A/B tests to see how we can further optimize and engage with our churned users, for example, either through push notification on our app messages, so just to see if our app is being on that level to maintain our users throughout the whole life cycle. And despite the well-known features, I don't know from the audience, from those who already used Firebase, if you're using it primarily for A/B testing through the remote config, or using for something specific, for example, checking the data analytics. Despite that, you also can see some of the amazing features for development, for crashlytics, for maintaining and logging the crashes in the lifetime, and constantly improving the app quality through performance monitoring, and especially what's the most important is growing your app through analytics, which is combined through Google Analytics, in-app messaging, cloud messaging, remote config, which we further do A/B tests from without needed to make a new app release, and so on. So those are the major steps that Firebase platform provides for us, which is totally enough to start with scaling your app monetization. And speaking about the Firebase features, obviously the first step, as for each app, it comes analysis. And as I mentioned before, Firebase retrieves data from Google Analytics. That's why we have this very big connection from Firebase and the whole analytics, which we can merge and discover new opportunities for us. Especially when we speak about Google Analytics, it's important to keep in mind the custom events. And with Firebase, we can develop very specific custom events based on our users and based how they interact on your app. So we can define audiences easily. And further on, we can work on Firebase predictions. I don't know if some of heard already about Firebase predictions, but Firebase predictions is working on this concept of machine learning algorithm, which predicts the most needed, for example, user segments for us. We can focus, for example, purchases versus non-purchasers. And Firebase predictions help for us to see which users will be profitable for us and attracts eventually those users into our app through acquisition campaigns. And with Firebase user audiences, we can clearly define which audiences you want to focus on. So either we are focusing on monetizing users through ad campaigns or through in-app purchases. We can easily define and segment those audiences. And later on also comes activation. So Firebase remote config, we release A/B tests without needed new app release, which of course for developers really reduces the time because we don't need to wait for a new release. We can easily make new A/B tests. For example, if you want to bring new ad format or you want to test out new features, we can easily implement those tests and release to a small segment of users or specific country to see how the performance will be basically. And engagement, so also important features for our churners who want to maintain the stable engagement rates throughout the app. So obviously cloud messaging, when we also can implement through Firebase remote config for A/B testing and Firebase in-app messaging. So speaking about analysis, as I mentioned before, Google Analytics comes in a primary step to connect and merge all those data points. And here also I'm mentioning one of the important product, which is AdMob. Some of you guys may probably heard. If you're using AdMob also, please raise your hands if some of them monetizing traps. Okay, so I see some people. So of course, depending on your app interface, if you have gaming app and you don't want to bring new ad formats, for example, because you might think that it might disrupt the user experience, of course, potentially it is true. However, connecting the Firebase to further scale this monetization, we can really think about bringing the exciting new ad formats, for example, app open, which doesn't disrupt our user experience because it appears only in the introduction of your app. Or we can think about the ad exit when user completes the last action. So we can place very natively our ads without disrupting user experience and without any worries that it might potentially disrupt our engagement rates, because if we're implementing it through A/B test, there's really no big deal of worrying, since we can really monetize and scale those efforts towards not only benefiting from in-app purchases, but also having this additional revenue for ads implemented in your app. So speaking about the join of the Google Analytics, AdMob, and Firebase, we can really for ourselves discover the new insights, which we potentially haven't been asked before. So for example, if we see in Firebase, it captures primarily the contextual app data, which is mainly focused on user engagement time, events that we want to track in throughout the user journey, either in onboarding or specific app features or app levels for gaming, in-app purchases and audiences, and for ad mob, we can specifically select the metrics such as impressions or clicks for ads. And eventually we can discover some questions that we haven't raised before. For example, how do reward ads impact user engagement and average revenue per user? So in fact, this connection, this merge really helps for us to see those new insights. And speaking about the custom events, which I also brought before, that we can really easily define those events, what we want to track in our app. We can see from Google Analytics comes from user insights and merging together with Firebase, with conversion events, with auto events, we can unlock those opportunities with user engagement and see from the data how we can further monetize our users. So as I see, some of the audience here is using AdMob just partially. I imagine that most of you are maybe monetizing through in-app ads. Sorry, not in-app ads or app purchases. So imagine you have this question within your team that you want to acquire users who are likely to make in-app purchase, and how we can acquire them. So you can do that with Firebase predictions. So one of the ways how to do this is to identify if the users will pay by launching the Google Ads campaign, and together with those already paid users, you can place your acquisition campaign to bid. So eventually, acquisition campaign could identify more paid users while minimizing the impact of conversion delay. So one of those insights we can actually discover for ourselves, since I imagine if we develop nice apps, we also want to monetize with them and improve our revenue as we can. So further speaking about in-app purchases, also one of the questions that Firebase can help for us to answer is, for example, are you showing in-app purchases for every player? And of course, you might do that because you might hope that first-time subscribers of purchasers are most likely to make a purchase since they are on the first time in your app. Or you're looking to maximize visibility for the in-app purchase promotion. However, as we spoke with Firebase predictions, such as we can think about, okay, what if we eliminate in-app purchases and we will think about purchases, about those users who don't want to complete purchase, so we can monetize them with ads. Why not? Because if they're coming for a specific market, maybe they have lower intention to purchase, and without them exiting our app and having those churn rates, we can think about why not to monetize them with ads. So one of the examples that we can also do with Firebase remote config and A/B testing is, for example, we want to predict non-purchasers. And we can define here two audiences, for example, predicted non-purchasers and predicted purchasers. And with smart segmentation rewarded ad, we can place the rewarded prompt with a or ad. And for the another one, we can show in-app purchases promo ad. And we can see which one is the more successful based on our audience. And since we are together here for a games event, some of the maybe nice strategies that I will be presenting also today regarding game optimization with Firebase. And here as well, optimization comes with A/B testing, which is the primarily thing that if you want to constantly improve our engagement rates. So how Firebase A/B testing primarily works is through remote config, as I mentioned, but also we can always think about the ways that A/B testing is not limited mostly for bringing new features or experimenting with in-app purchase formats. We also can think about experimenting with push messages, in-app messages to unlock those data-driven numbers and see how we can on an ongoing basis improve our app rates. So if I brought some curiosity towards adoption of new ad formats, because you might think, okay, maybe that's nice things to do. If I'm mostly monetizing through in-app purchases, why not to think about bringing new ad format? And if you're here from a company or you're here individual developer, obviously having this additional revenue might really be beneficial for you to constantly think about how you can further grow your audience, either with acquisition campaigns or just having this benefit for yourself for having the new revenue source from ads. And bringing new ad format to your app is fairly easy, straightforward process, especially if you're quite worried about your user experience. With A/B testing, you can easily do that and test out different ad formats to see which ad format potentially might bring the lowest impact for your engagement rates. And one of the ways how we can think about experimenting with new ad format, so obviously to remote config, we use this parameter to control display of ad units. And later on with Firebase A/B testing, we display new ad unit to a small subset of users. And also we display existing ad unit to most users. So we're forming those two variants to see which user segment will be adopting our new ad format, and later on we'll be measuring those numbers through ad month revenue and user retention metrics. Some of the feature that also is quite important to maintain your app optimization revenue on an ongoing basis, it's smart segmentation. And smart segmentation is obviously one of the ways to improve your current monetization efforts. And one of the ways how it can be done is, for example, focusing on better rewarded items for unlikely spenders. So if you detected specific segment in your app users that are not very likely to spend in your app, either the purchase new features or unlock new app levels, we can think about smartly segmenting them and give premium in-app purchases items to users who are unlikely or to even spend in the app. And as I mentioned before in this graph, that you can predict those users and see which are the most likely to spend and eventually monetize them accordingly. And if we speak especially about different localities that we may have, if you start noticing that based on countries, you might see a very big disparity between users who are most likely to spend. So for example, coming from US market, let's say, you can easily place in-app purchases with a higher price, for example, in those countries. And in countries where we have lower adoption rates for in-app purchases, we can implement more in-app ads. And the engagement rates both for those territories might be very positive, since we thinking smart way how we can segment our users in the most profitable way, first of all, for us, to further scale those monetization efforts. And some of the Firebase recipes that we with a team are working on an ongoing basis is to provide some recommendations for app developers how we can suggest new ways towards improving monetization, improving app experience. So we review some of the cases for that. Since also we've been quite considerate about gaming apps, think about also the ways if you're showing the same rewarded items to every player. You might think, yes, because why not? Every player is equal, so we will be focusing and monetizing users with the rewarded items on the same levels. Since you might be worried about fairness, or you might be worried about community discovering differential pricing. However, in reality, if we're speaking especially about app monetization, all matters is smart segmentation, how we're thinking about each individual users. So if we can make rewarded experiences for each user individually, then we can really see improvement for our monetization. And that can be easily done with Firebase remote config without even worried releasing a new app update just in a fast and efficient way. So since I spoke about right now giving differential items to predicted non-purchases, for example, if we see that based on our data analytics, we see, all right, this market is not performing that well towards in-app purchases, we can think about Firebase predictions, this feature that I already mentioned. So either we can define those two different audiences through Firebase, logging those specific events as well. So it is predicting two different segments of users, which is non-purchases and purchasers. So for non-purchasers, we can think about setting rewarded item to high value. And for purchasers, we can have a regular rewarded request. If we're having the app, which, for example, is primarily focused on rewarded ads, we can think about why not to even scale on this effort to give different rewarded items based on our user criteria. And also quite important aspect is giving the player what they need. And to maintain those engagement rates and avoid risk of churn, especially if your game is quite complex and requires different stages to complete the next level, we might think about all the audiences which we might bring to our app. And me as a consultant, I monitor apps on a daily basis, and my requirement is to interact with ads and apps eventually, gaming apps. And for some apps, I see that it's quite tough to progress to the next level, especially for those users who never played games before, or for those users who might be finding difficulty to interact with your app. So thinking about those different user segments is really crucial, because if we are not thinking that way, we have this risk of having the churn. So it's quite important to have those adjustments based on the specific player level. And speaking about the critical gameplay moments, we can think about also segmenting on users. For example, one player might be lacks resources to win a level after a couple of times. So with Firebase, imagine you'll be doing this custom event or logging the specific audience that you have this user segment that really has struggled to progress towards the next level in your app. And based on those numbers, you can think about segmenting accordingly. For example, another stage will be having the difficulty level is too high. And for those users, you can think about, right, for the first one, you can have the ads, interstitials, so to motivate them and encourage to play further. While for those users, you can introduce messaging or notifications and bring those additional gifts or in-app offers to also motivate them to stick with your app despite the the difficulty that they may face. We can think about the ways how to maintain them. And obviously, how we can do that is through Firebase, logging those events, identifying your audiences, and just seeing how you can, see through which user base you can segment in this way to motivate them and to maintain keeping those engagement rates. And some of the ways which events you can potentially track in your app is, for example, the number of sessions that user starts to complete a game, or level upgrade score, community engagement, level completion. And why those events really matter is because if you start tracking those events, you will know eventually, as we spoke before, how to segment your users accordingly. So for you, will be the first step is to identify the critical touch points where, for example, conversion drops or where you experience the churn. So you will see further how from this stage you can optimize further. And I hope you had some thoughts for yourself about Firebase and about all the opportunities it can bring to your app. And we have some also time to look at our mini case study. And here I have example for app which we developed internally with Firebase team. And we use it mostly for testing also purposes. And here primarily the question is that Bingo Blast, which is our app, is using hybrid monetization model with in-app purchases and ads. And their goal is to basically improve overall revenue and UX for highly engaged core users. So right now, they having these two hypotheses, what they can do to improve their current monetization. So hypothesis one is, for example, reduced ad reward amount for highly engaged users will increase ad revenue. So for example, they might think that, all right, users who will have less time rewarded to beat the level, resulting in harder progression. And eventually this will increase the number of trials required per user to beat each level, and hence more rewarded ad impressions resulting into more ad revenue. So that's the first hypothesis. And the second hypothesis will be increased ad reward amount for highly engaged users to increase in-app purchase revenue. And even though those questions might be two different ones with two different hypotheses, the answer is actually, there is no one defined answer, because both can be true. So we'll never know until we run an experiment, which obviously that's why I'm here to present you Firebase and tell more about those features that we can do. And I see that we're running out of time. So that's primarily it, what I wanted to cover. Also, there are some case studies, amazing ones that I also could share eventually if you have some questions about Firebase. And since I mentioned before introductions, we have some time for those mini competition. So I'll be asking right now from the audience if you kept track of those Pizza Man's Firebase logos. Raise your hands of the number that you might potentially guess. So I see who has the answer, so I'll be approaching people. Yes, so what's your number? 10. 10, all right. Yeah, 14. 11, all right. 12, yeah, 14. All right. 14, all right. All right, so let's see who was the correct one. I'm not able to ask everyone because just we're limiting per audience. But the correct answer is 11. So who was the correct one? There was, yeah, I remember. All right, so congratulations, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot once again. I am afraid we don't have time for questions, but you can ask them after the lecture. Feel free to connect via the Pine tool. So yeah, you will get your chance to get answers to the questions. So thanks again, and congrats.